Some men raise a glass to celebrate. I raised mine to remember every single word being said about my daughter, in a language they thought I'd never understand. Smile, Mark. Just smile and pour the wine. That's what I kept telling myself at that table at Field and Main, the restaurant off King Street in downtown Leesburg I'd booked 3 weeks in advance because it had the kind of view, rolling hills, split-rail fences, horses grazing behind glass, that says we belong here without anybody having to say it out loud. I wanted Julian's parents to feel welcomed. I wanted them to feel like Loudoun County wasn't some flyover, nothing between D.C. and nowhere. I wanted more than anything for my daughter Molly to look around that table and see her whole world sitting in one room, getting along. I didn't get that. I got something else. And it started with a wine list. "Mark, is this the Bordeaux you selected?" Jean-Luc asked, holding the bottle like it had personally wronged him. His accent made every word sound like a verdict. "In France, we would not serve this with the duck. It's Virginia wine, actually," I said. "Local vineyard, about 20 minutes from here." Jean-Luc set the bottle down like it had a smell. "Ah, how resourceful." Beatrice smiled at me the way you'd smile at a child who just showed you a crayon drawing. "And what is it you do again, Mark? Construction?" She said construction like it was something you'd need to wash off your hands before dinner. "Contracting," I said. "I build things, mostly custom homes now." "How practical," Beatrice said, and turned back to her wine. "Practical." Like I'd told her I collect bottle caps. I let it go. Molly was laughing at something Julian said, her hand in his, and that right there was worth every backhanded compliment these two could throw at me over a plate of duck confit. I've been broke. I've slept in my truck between jobs when I was 24 and too proud to call my own father for help. I know how to eat condescension with a smile. You do it for the people you love. What I didn't expect was for them to think I couldn't hear the real thing. Welcome to Dad's Raw Revenge. Get comfortable. This story is going to take you somewhere. Hit that like button and drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from. Trust me, you're going to love it here. Here's what nobody in that restaurant knew about me. Not Julian, not his parents, not even Molly. Not really. Before I started my contracting business, I spent 4 years working construction and infrastructure jobs overseas in my 20s. Lyon mostly. Sometime outside Marseille. I didn't go to some fancy language school. I learned the way you learn anything worth knowing, by getting yelled at by foremen until you understood every word of it. I came home fluent, and then I came home quiet about it, because nobody at a job site in Loudoun County cares if you can conjugate a verb. It never came up. It never mattered. Until it did. About halfway through the meal, Jean-Luc leaned toward Beatrice and said something low, in French, with a small laugh at the end of it. And Beatrice, thinking she was safe, thinking the dumb American contractor across the table was just a guy who builds decks, answered him, in French, like flipping a switch. "They think I'm furniture." I kept my face still. I kept cutting my chicken. And I listened. They talked about Molly's dress first. Beatrice called it jolie pour du pret-à-porter, pretty for something off the rack. Then Jean-Luc mocked the way I'd pronounced charcuterie earlier, doing an impression that made Beatrice laugh into her napkin. Small stuff. Cruel, but small. The kind of thing you could let slide if you had to. Then Beatrice glanced past my shoulder, toward the wall near the hostess stand, where the restaurant had a little gallery of local craftsmen's work. A habit of theirs apparently rotating pieces from builders around the county. And there, framed under glass, was a photo of a bookshelf. My bookshelf. The one I'd spent 4 months building for Molly's room when she was 11, out of reclaimed oak from a barn that used to sit where our house is now. I'd sanded every shelf by hand. Molly kept her horse ribbons on it until she went to college. Beatrice tilted her head at it and said, quiet, amused, "Il a probablement trouvé ça dans une décharge. Les Américains n'ont aucun goût. Ils clouent du bois bon marché et appellent ça de l'artisanat." He probably found it at a dump. Americans have no taste. They just bolt cheap wood together and call it craftsmanship. I set my fork down. Not hard. Not a scene. Just down, deliberate. The kind of quiet that, if you knew me, you'd know meant something had shifted. She's talking about the shelf I built for my little girl. She's talking about 4 months of my life like it's garbage I scraped off a curb. Nobody at that table noticed. Julian was refilling his water. Molly was checking her phone under the table, smiling at something. Beatrice took a slow sip of wine, pleased with herself, like she'd just delivered a punchline at a party where nobody spoke her language. Except I did. I looked up. Jean-Luc caught my eye first. Just a glance, testing whether the American had noticed anything. I smiled at him. Easy. Warm. The kind of smile that says everything's fine here. "You know," I said in English, setting my napkin in my lap, I've always thought the things people build with their own hands say more about them than anything they could buy. Don't you agree, Jean-Luc? Jean-Luc blinked. Of course. Good, I said. I'd hate for anyone at this table to think I don't know the difference between something cheap and something that lasts. I let that sit there for exactly 2 seconds. Long enough. Not too long. You have no idea what you just said in front of me, and I'm not going to tell you. Not yet. That should have been the worst of it. It wasn't. 20 minutes later, dessert plates cleared. Beatrice leaned toward Julien, not Jean-Luc this time, Julien, her own son, and asked, casual as asking about the weather, Est-ce que les papiers sont prêts? Are the papers ready? Julien nodded, barely looking up from his espresso. Presque. La semaine prochaine, je pense. Almost. Next week, I think. I kept my face exactly where it was. Pleasant, interested in nothing but my coffee. Papers. What papers? Ready for what? I didn't get the rest of it right then. That came later, in pieces, over the next few days, the way these things do. But I got enough. I got a name. Fiducie, trust. And I got a phrase from Jean-Luc that turned my stomach in a way Beatrice's comment about the bookshelf never could. Le père est tellement désespéré pour l'approbation. C'est pathétique. The father is so desperate for approval. It's pathetic. And then Julien, my daughter's fiancé, the man who'd asked me for my blessing 4 months ago with tears actually in his eyes, or so I thought, chuckled, and said, C'est pour ça que ça marche. Il veut tellement que Molly soit heureuse qu'il signera n'importe quoi. Je te l'avais dit, il est prévisible. That's why it works. He wants Molly to be happy so badly, he'll sign anything. I told you, he's predictable. Then he turned, right on cue, like flipping a switch back to English, and took Molly's hand across the table. You having a good time, babe? He asked her, that same warm, doting look on his face he'd had since day one. The best, Molly said, and leaned over to kiss his cheek. He's not marrying my daughter. He's performing marrying my daughter. And I just watched the rehearsal. I sat there with my coffee going cold in front of me, watching the man my little girl was about to build a life with hold her hand with the same hand he'd just used to call her father. Predictable. And worse, to call her a means to an end I still didn't fully understand yet. I wanted to stand up. Every part of me wanted to stand up right then, throw that napkin on the table, and ask Jean-Luc in his own language exactly what papers he was so eager to have ready. Don't. Not yet. Not here. Because here's the thing about being a father, something you learn the hard way. If you blow up in a restaurant over something your daughter can't even hear, you're not the hero of that story. You're just the jealous, controlling dad who ruined her engagement dinner. Molly would defend Julien. She'd apologize to his parents on my behalf. And I would have handed them exactly what they wanted, a reason to paint me as the unreasonable one before this thing had even started. So I smiled. I paid the check. Cash tipped the whole 9. And I walked my daughter and her fiancé's parents out to the valet. And I shook Jean-Luc's hand, and I told Beatrice the evening had been wonderful. And I meant every word of it in a way she'll never understand until it's far too late for her to do anything about it. I got in my truck, an old Tacoma I've had since before Molly could walk, patched up more times than I can count, and I sat in the parking lot for a long time before I turned the key. They think I'm a fool. They think this is already over. I thought about that bookshelf. I thought about 4 months of sanding and staining, or a piece of furniture Beatrice called garbage, without knowing the man who built it was sitting 6 feet away, listening to every word. I thought about papers. I thought about the word prévisible, predictable, and how it was said about my own daughter, like she was a line item in somebody's spreadsheet. And I made myself a promise, right there in that parking lot, engine idling, hands on the wheel. I'm not going to say a word, not yet, but I am going to find out exactly what they think they're getting away with. And when I do, I'm going to let them explain it to me themselves, in whatever language they're most comfortable using. I put the truck in reverse, drove home slow, the way I always do on nights when my head's too full to trust myself with a yellow light. Molly texted me before I even got in the door. Dad, thank you for tonight. It meant everything to me that you tried so hard with them. I sat in my driveway and read that message twice. She has no idea what I heard tonight, and it's going to break her heart when she finds out. But it's going to break a lot cleaner than what they've got planned for her. I texted back, anything for you, sweetheart. Get some sleep. Then I called an old buddy of mine from my Lyon days, a man named Grant Ferris, who'd gone into corporate risk consulting after he left the field. The kind of guy who knew people in Europe. It was almost midnight. He picked up on the third ring. Withers? It's been years. Everything all right? No, I said. I need a favor. And I need you to be very, very good at what you do. 0. They thought the hardest part was already behind them. They thought all that was left was paperwork. They had no idea I was the paperwork. Give them exactly what they expect, a grateful, clueless father-in-law who just wants his little girl happy. That became my job for the next 3 weeks. Not contractor, not father, actor. The morning after the dinner at Field and Main, I called Molly before I even made coffee. "Hey, sweetheart. I was thinking, why don't Jean-Luc and Beatrice stay at the guest house for the rest of the week? Save them the drive back and forth from their hotel in D.C. Let them really get a feel for how we do things out here." There was a pause on the line. "Dad, are you sure? I know last night was a lot. It was more than you know." "Molly, I want this family thing to work," I said. And every word of it was true, just not in the way she thought. "Let me do this." She got quiet, and I could hear the relief in it. "That would mean so much. Thank you, Dad." I hung up and stood in my kitchen for a second, looking out at the guest house across the yard, the one I'd built with my own. 2 hands the same summer I built that bookshelf, back when Molly was still small enough to hand me nails from a coffee can and call it helping. "You want a front row seat to my life? Fine, come on in. Just remember, I can hear you from every room in this house, in every language you've got." Jean-Luc and Beatrice moved into the guest house that Thursday. Julian stayed at Molly's place in town, which was its own kind of relief. One less performance to manage under my own roof. And for the better part of a week, I played my part like I'd been rehearsing for it my whole life. I asked Beatrice about her garden back in Normandy. I let Jean-Luc correct my grilling technique on a Sunday cookout. Virginia-style pulled pork, hickory smoke rolling off my old offset smoker in the backyard, and Jean-Luc standing there with a glass of wine telling me the meat would be better with a proper marinade. I nodded. I smiled. I said, "I'll have to try that sometime," while internally cataloging every syllable that came out of his mouth like evidence. Because it was evidence. I just wasn't filing it in a courtroom yet. "You want to underestimate me? Good. That's the only weapon I need." Thursday night, after Jean-Luc and Beatrice turned in early, jet lag they claimed, though I had a hunch it was something else keeping them tired, I sat in my truck in the driveway with my phone and called Grant Ferris back. "Talk to me," I said. "What'd you find?" Grant didn't waste time on pleasantries. Never did. "Mark, I've been doing this a long time. This one's ugly. Here we go. Jean-Luc Moreau's company, the import business he keeps bragging about, it's a shell. Barely operational. Filed for what's basically the French equivalent of a restructuring 2 years ago, and never recovered. There's tax liens stacked on the family estate in Normandy going back 3 years. We're talking real numbers, Mark. Numbers that don't get fixed by selling off a wine cellar." I sat there gripping the wheel, staring at the dark windows of my own guest house like I could see through the walls. "And Julian?" I asked. Grant exhaled, and that told me before he even said it. Julian's got an active civil suit against him back in France. Failed business venture. Some kind of import-export scheme that went south 2 years ago. Took a handful of investors down with it. Nothing criminal, but it's not nothing either. And Mark, he never mentioned any of this to your daughter. Never. Not one word. "No," I said. "Not one word." "There's more," Grant said. "You mentioned they've been talking about some kind of trust arrangement. Postnuptial, they're calling it. Estate planning." "I'd bet my house it's not estate planning," Grant said. "Sounds a lot more like a lifeline. If they can get access to your commercial land through a joint trust, especially anything structured offshore, that's liquidity. That's collateral. That's a way to keep the whole thing from collapsing without anyone back home ever knowing how bad it got." I sat in the dark for a long moment after we hung up, letting it all settle. They didn't fly 6,000 miles to welcome me into their family. They flew 6,000 miles because I owned something they need. I thought about Molly's face at that dinner, the way she'd looked at Julian like he hung the moon, the way she'd texted me that night, "Thank you for trying so hard with them," thinking her father was the one who needed to prove himself. She has no idea she's the one being auditioned, and she has no idea for what. I didn't sleep much that night. The opportunity came that Sunday. I invited them to brunch on the back porch. Virginia ham, biscuits, and a fine French roast I knew Jean-Luc couldn't criticize. "Mark," Jean-Luc began, setting his coffee down and adopting his smooth, practiced charm. "Julian tells us you own substantial commercial acreage near the highway. In Europe, family wealth is consolidated. We are preparing a joint family trust draft through our estate attorneys, something to protect Molly and Julian long term. We'd like to review it with you before the wedding." He didn't hand me a pen. He was probing, testing if the dumb contractor would bite before paying his lawyers to finalize the paperwork. "Family to family," Beatrice added softly. "It's how we protect our children." "That sounds real generous," I said, scratching my jaw like a man trying hard to grasp a big concept. I build houses, Beatrice. I don't know much about fancy trusts. Why don't you have your people send the draft directly to me? I'll review it. I watched the subtle glint of triumph in Jean-Luc's eyes. He thought he'd baited the hook, and I was swimming right into the net. That night, I sat alone in my study with that folder spread out across my desk, reading line after line of language that might as well have been in French for how little sense it made to me. Terms like irrevocable trust structure. Terms like beneficial interest transfer. My eyes kept sliding off the page. I built a house with my own 2 hands. I can read a blueprint upside down in the rain. I cannot make heads or tails of this. I almost didn't call. 20-some years of handling my own business, my own contracts, my own bad breaks. There's a pride in that, a stubbornness, and it doesn't like admitting when it's out past its depth. But I thought about Molly. I thought about her signing something like this, one day with a smile on her face, thinking it was a wedding gift. I picked up the phone at 10 p.m. and called Roger Callahan, my attorney, a guy I'd used for every land deal and contract dispute since I started my business 15 years ago. Roger, it's Mark. Sorry for the hour. Mark Withers calling after 9. This can't be good, Roger said, and I could hear him settling into a chair on the other end. What's going on? I can't make heads or tails of this offshore trust nonsense, I said, and I read him 3 lines straight off the page, slow so he could follow. There was a long pause on his end, long enough that my stomach dropped before he even said a word. Mark, Roger said, his voice dropping into that flat, deadpan tone he uses when someone's trying to commit a felony. This isn't a prenup, and it's not a family gift. It's an offshore cross-collateralization agreement. I gripped the phone tighter. Explain that in carpenter terms, Roger. They've structured this trust so that your commercial property acts as the primary loan guarantor for Jean-Luc's European entity, Roger explained. If his business defaults, which Grant's search proves it's about to, the offshore lenders have an immediate, unappealable lien against your land. You aren't giving Molly a trust fund, Mark. You're signing a confession that makes your life's work pay off their foreign debts. I sat back in my chair. There it is. I'm going to need you to send me everything you have, Roger said. Every document. Tonight if you can. You'll have it in 10 minutes, I said. I hung up the phone and sat there in the quiet of my study, and something in my chest went very, very still. They weren't trying to marry into my family. They were trying to buy it, and they were going to use my own daughter's wedding day to do it. I thought about the bookshelf again. I thought about he's predictable, and the father is so desperate for approval, and every single small cruelty they'd let slip in a language they thought was a locked door. You didn't outsmart me. You just underestimated the wrong father. I didn't feel angry anymore. Not the hot kind of angry, anyway. What settled into me that night was colder than that, steadier. I'm not a mastermind. I'm just a man who knows when to ask for help. And I've got help now. The next morning, I found Jean-Luc on the back porch with his coffee, same spot as always, looking out over my property like a man surveying land he already considered half his. Not yet, Jean-Luc. Not ever, actually. But you don't know that yet. Morning, I said, sitting down across from him. I read through that folder last night. He set his cup down, attentive now, that same practiced warmth sliding onto his face. And, honestly, it's a lot, I said, running a hand through my hair like a man genuinely overwhelmed. This sounds wonderful for Molly. I really do believe that. But I want to do this right. Let me have my family attorney draft a clean, updated master contract. Something simple, something everyone can understand. And we sign it together. All of us, at the rehearsal dinner, in front of the whole family. I watched it land on his face, the flicker of surprise quickly smoothed over into something like delight. That's a wonderful idea, Mark, Jean-Luc said, and I'd have believed every word of it if I hadn't heard what I'd heard a week before. A signing in front of everyone. Very meaningful. You have no idea how meaningful. Beatrice came out onto the porch just then, drawn by the warmth in her husband's voice, and when Jean-Luc told her the plan, she actually clasped her hands together. Oh, Mark, she said, this means so much to us. It means a lot to me too, I said, and that part, at least, was true. They believed it. I could see it in both their faces, the quiet private triumph of 2 people who thought they'd successfully played the fool into signing away his own future. I could practically hear the math running behind Jean-Luc's eyes. Days now. Just days and the estate is saved, and nobody back home ever needs to know how close it came. Let them believe that. Let them pour themselves another glass of my wine and toast to it tonight. It's the last thing they're going to get to celebrate at my expense. The days between that porch conversation and the rehearsal dinner moved slow and fast all at once. Slow in the way waiting always is. Fast in the way a countdown feels once you know exactly what's coming. Roger worked with me every evening, building out the real story into something clean and undeniable. The tax liens, the lawsuit, the exact language buried in that trust that would have handed my land to a man across an ocean. Grant sent over documentation, translated, notarized, airtight. And every day, I still smiled across the table at Jean-Luc. Still let Beatrice correct the way I said charcuterie. Still let Julian shake my hand and call me Pop with that easy grin of his. Like we were already family. Like he hadn't sat at a table 2 weeks earlier and called my daughter predictable to his own parents. Keep smiling, Julian. You've got no idea what's waiting for you. Molly, for her part, floated through those 2 weeks the happiest I'd seen her in years. Planning seating charts, picking out her rehearsal dinner dress, texting me pictures of centerpiece options like my opinion on floral arrangements had ever mattered to anyone. Dad, what do you think? White roses or the wildflower mix? I stared at that text for a long time before I answered. Wildflowers. Because in about a week, sweetheart, I'm going to hand you back a life that's actually yours. And I want it to look like something that grew here, not something imported. Wildflowers, I texted back. Always. The rehearsal dinner was set for that Saturday. String lights ordered. The good china out. Jean-Luc and Beatrice sipping champagne on my dime, believing with everything in them that this was the night they finally won. Let them believe it. Let them raise their glasses. I've got a toast of my own coming. If you have been listening for a while, drop your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button while you're at it, and be sure you're subscribed. They raised their glasses one last time that night, celebrating a victory that had never actually been theirs. Drink up. It's the last thing I'm buying you. The string lights went up across the back patio that Saturday evening, threading through the old oak trees I'd planted the same year Molly was born. Long tables draped in white linen, wildflower centerpieces, mason jars stuffed with black-eyed Susans and Queen Anne's lace the way Molly wanted. 40 of our closest people, laughing, drinking, passing plates of Virginia ham biscuits and grilled trout down the table like it was any other summer gathering. Except it wasn't, and I was the only one at that party who knew it. Jean-Luc and Beatrice held court near the head of the table, champagne flutes in hand. My champagne from a case I bought specifically for this night, though not for the reason they thought. Beatrice wore a cream dress that probably cost more than my first truck. Jean-Luc had that same easy, patronizing smile he'd worn since the night we met, like he was doing all of us a favor just by showing up. 2 more hours, Jean-Luc. Enjoy the view. I caught Beatrice leaning toward Julian near the drink table, her voice low, her eyes on me across the yard. I wasn't close enough to hear all of it, not with the band warming up and 40 conversations happening at once. But I didn't need to hear all of it. I'd heard enough of these two by now to fill in the rest just from the shape of her mouth and the smug little tilt of her chin. Regarde le sourire, she said, and I caught that much clean across the noise. Look at him smiling. Julian smirked into his glass and said something back I couldn't catch. But I didn't need the words. I'd heard that tone before, at Field and Maine, over duck confit and a bookshelf they thought was garbage. Go ahead, enjoy the last few minutes of thinking you've won. Roger was there too, off to the side in a blazer, nursing a club soda, looking every bit like a family friend, and nothing like the man holding a folder in his car that was about to end 2 people's entire con. He caught my eye once, gave me the smallest nod. Ready when you are. I looked over at Molly. She was laughing with her college roommates near the dessert table, her rehearsal dinner dress catching the string lights. Happier than I'd seen her in longer than I could remember. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I'm about to break your heart tonight, but I'd rather break it now than watch them break it slowly for the rest of your life. One lie at a time. I picked up my glass, tapped it once with my ring, the sound cutting clean through the noise of the party. Conversations dropped off one by one, until the only sound left was the crickets starting up in the tree line, and somewhere behind me, a string light buzzing faintly on its cord. If everybody could give me just a minute, I said, standing at the head of the table. I promise I won't keep you from the trout for long. That got a laugh. Good. Let them stay loose. Let them stay comfortable a little while longer. Most of you know me, I started. I don't love speeches. I'd rather be up on a roof somewhere than up here with all of you looking at me. Another easy laugh. Molly beamed at me from her seat, that same soft, grateful look she'd had since that first dinner. Thank you for trying so hard with them. I did try, sweetheart. Just maybe not the way you think. But my daughter's getting married in 2 weeks, I said. And I've spent every day since she was born trying to give her the kind of life where she never has to wonder if she's loved, where she never has to wonder if somebody's telling her the truth. I let that sit a second. My eyes moved just briefly to Julian. He was still smiling, still holding his glass loose in one hand, still playing the part of a man with absolutely nothing to hide. Not for long. I want to thank Jean-Luc and Beatrice, I said, turning toward them, raising my glass slightly in their direction. For coming all this way to be part of this family. That's not a small thing. Flying across an ocean for people you barely know. Jean-Luc dipped his head. Gracious. Practiced. The pleasure is entirely ours, Mark. I'm sure it is, I said. Something in my tone must have caught, because I saw Beatrice's smile flicker. Just barely, just at the edges. The way you notice a draft under a door you thought was sealed shut. Since our guests traveled all the way from Normandy, I said, turning to face the head table, my voice steady and easy, I thought it only right to honor them in their native language, especially since they've spent the last 3 weeks assuming I couldn't understand a single word of it. I looked directly at Jean-Luc. The color began to drain from his face. Je vais continuer en français. The accent I'd buried for 25 years came out sharp and effortless. I watched Jean-Luc's glass freeze halfway to his mouth. Beatrice went entirely rigid. Pendant 3 semaines, vous avez parlé de ma fille comme d'une affaire commerciale? I said, my voice cutting through the quiet patio. For 3 weeks you spoke of my daughter like a business transaction. Vous avez ri de mon travail. Vous avez insulté ma maison. Et vous avez appelé ma fille prévisible, tout en complotant pour voler mes terres. You laughed at my work, insulted my home, and called my daughter predictable while plotting to steal my land. Julien scrambled in his chair, his face flushed red. Mark, stop tais-toi, Julien, I said, cold as steel. Shut up, Julien. J'ai tout entendu. Chaque mot. Depuis le premier soir au restaurant. I turned back to the room and switched seamlessly back to English. I heard every single word. The words hit the table like a dropped plate. 40 faces turned, first toward Jean-Luc and Beatrice, then toward me, then slowly toward Molly, whose face had gone from confusion to something else entirely. Something breaking. Dad, she started, her voice small. What? I'm sorry, sweetheart, I said, and I meant it more than I'd meant anything in a long time. I didn't want you to find out like this, but I couldn't let you find out after the wedding either. I reached down beside my chair and picked up the folder Roger had brought, the same kind of leather folder Jean-Luc had slid across my porch table 2 weeks earlier. Except this, one didn't have a single lie inside it. 2 weeks ago, I said, laying it open on the table for everyone to see, Jean-Luc and Beatrice asked me to sign a family trust. They called it estate planning. A gift, they said. A way to welcome us into the family properly. I flipped to the first page. What it actually was a transfer of my commercial property into an offshore holding entity controlled entirely by Jean-Luc Moreau. Gasps down the table now. Molly's roommate covered her mouth. Roger stood quietly near the drink table, letting me run this the whole way through. Jean-Luc's company back in France is a shell, I said, flipping another page. It's been collapsing for 2 years. There are tax liens against his estate going back further than that. And Julien, I looked at him now, steady, no anger in my voice at all. Just fact after fact after fact, has an active civil lawsuit against him in France for a failed business deal he never once mentioned to the woman he's supposed to be marrying in 2 weeks. That's not, Julien started, half rising from his chair. Mark, that's not what it... I'm not finished, I said, and something in my voice made him sit back down. Molly stared at Julien now, waiting. Really waiting, the way you wait for someone to prove you wrong about the worst thing you've ever thought about them. Julian's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Molly, it's not what it looks like. She cut him off, and her voice when it came was calmer than I expected, colder than I'd ever heard from her. You called me cheap, she said. You laughed about my father's house. You made me a pawn in your family's scheme. She reached down, slow, deliberate, and pulled the ring off her finger. Set it down on his plate right next to his untouched trout. I was going to spend my life with you, she said. And you were going to spend yours robbing me. She stood, and instead of turning toward her friends, instead of running off the way anybody might have forgiven her for doing, she walked around the table to where I was standing. She didn't hide behind me. She stood beside me, shoulder to shoulder. That's my girl. I turned back to Julien, who still hadn't fully found his footing, his parents on either side of him gone pale and silent, cornered by their own words coming back to them, in a language they'd never once imagined would betray them. I handed Julien a second document from the folder. Not the trust this time. That's an itemized invoice, I said, for every expense your family's accrued during your stay in my guest house. And a formal notice. You'll need to vacate my property by tomorrow morning. Jean-Luc found his voice first, thin and brittle. Mark, surely we can discuss. We discussed plenty, I said. In 2 languages, apparently. I just didn't join in until now. I picked up my champagne glass, the the one I'd raised at the start of all this, and took a slow sip, savoring it, before setting it back down on the table with a small, deliberate click. "Oh, and Jean-Luc," I said, "I paid for tonight's dinner out of my peasant bank account. I'd say you're welcome, but we both know you don't mean it when you say thank you." I gestured toward the driveway, toward the guest house lit up gold across the yard, the same guest house I'd built with my own 2 hands, the same summer as that bookshelf. "The guest house is unlocked," I said. "You're welcome to stay there tonight, but I'd recommend calling a hotel instead. The breakfast is better." Nobody at that table said a word. Jean-Luc's jaw worked like he wanted to argue, wanted to salvage something, anything, out of the wreckage, but there was nothing left to salvage, not with a folder full of documentation sitting open on the table, not with his own son's words handed back to him in the very language he thought had made him untouchable. I looked down at Molly. She looked up at me, tears standing in her eyes, but her jaw set, steady, sure. "You ready?" I asked her, quiet, just for her. She nodded. Together, we walked away from that table, past the string lights, past the wildflowers in their mason jars, past 40 stunned faces and one folder that had just ended a con. 2 people flew 6,000 miles to pull off. Behind us, I heard Beatrice's voice crack, high and desperate, calling after us, words I didn't bother turning around to catch, in English or French. It didn't matter anymore. I'd heard everything I needed to hear from that family the first night, over duck confit, thinking I couldn't understand a word of it. "You were wrong about a lot of things, Jean-Luc. But you were most wrong about this, thinking a quiet man with calloused hands wouldn't know exactly what to do with the truth once he had it." Molly slipped her hand into mine as we walked toward the house, the same way she used to when she was small enough to hand me nails from a coffee can and call it helping. "Thank you, Dad," she said quietly, "for hearing what I couldn't." "Always, sweetheart," I said, every single word. Behind us, the string lights kept glowing over an empty toast, and a family that had come across an ocean to take something from us, and left instead with nothing but the sound of their own words, finally understood. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment below. Let me know where you're watching from. I will see you on the next one.